Stop! Leave him alone. A 12-year-old homeless girl who saved a CEO in the rain. He fell to his knees in the rain, blood mixing with the dirt beneath him, while two shadows closed in. A man once feared as the Iron CEO, now gasping, broken, forgotten in a dark Manhattan alley. And then, from the mouth of the alley, a trembling voice screamed, "Stop! Leave him alone!" A 12-year-old girl, soaked to the bone, dared to face the monsters no one else would. In that moment, two worlds collided: power and poverty, fear and courage. What would you have done in his place? Would you walk away or step into the storm? Welcome to Emotional Echoes, a channel where emotions come alive and every story leaves a lasting echo in your heart. Please subscribe to Emotional Echoes. Help us reach 1,000 subscribers so more souls can feel these stories. Stay with my video till the very end and let me know where you're watching from so I can see how far this story spreads. Now, let me tell you a story that begins with a man's fall and a child's unshakable courage. Ethan Monroe had been called the Iron CEO for years, the kind of man who could fire 5 people before lunch and smile through a billion-dollar loss. Tonight he was just another man bleeding in an alley, gasping for air as his knees gave out. His tailored suit clung to him, heavy with rain and dirt, while the taste of blood sat bitter on his tongue. He tried to stand, but the pain in his ribs tore through him like fire. For the first time in years, he felt small. Two shadows loomed over him. Their voices were low, cold, filled with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing no one will stop you. One grabbed his collar, yanking him upright, demanding something he could barely process. The world blurred, spinning between light and darkness. Ethan's hand reached for his phone, but it was kicked away. Another blow came, harder, sharper. His breath cracked, and for a second, he wondered if this was how it all ended for a man who thought he was untouchable. Then a voice cut through the rain, high, shaky, but fierce. "Stop! Leave him alone!" The men turned, laughing when they saw who it was. A little girl, no older than 12, standing at the mouth of the alley with a broken umbrella hanging from one hand. Her sneakers were soaked, her jeans torn, but her eyes held something wild, something that made the laughter die halfway. One of them barked out, "This ain't your fight, kid. Go home." She didn't move. "Then why does it feel like mine?" Her voice trembled, but she didn't step back. Ethan watched her through blurred vision, confusion mixing with disbelief. The smaller man stepped toward her, raising his hand. She didn't flinch. She threw the umbrella aside and grabbed a piece of brick from the ground. The sound of it hitting the man's arm cracked through the alley, loud and shocking. He cursed, clutching his elbow, shouting at his partner to leave it. They backed away, muttering under their breath, disappearing into the sheets of rain. The girl ran to Ethan's side. He could barely focus on her face, only the small hands shaking as they tried to lift his head. Her voice came again, softer now, breathless. "Can you hear me? You have to get up, please." He tried to speak, but only managed a broken sound. She pressed his hand against his chest. "You're not dead. Not tonight." She pulled his arm over her shoulder, struggling under his weight, and began dragging him out of the alley. Each step cost her strength she didn't have. Her shoes slipped on the wet pavement, but she refused to stop. Ethan's body was heavy, lifeless, but she kept moving, muttering under her breath that everything would be okay. When they reached the street, she collapsed beside him, both of them soaked, trembling, alive. His eyes fluttered, catching one last glimpse of the girl's face, thin, pale, streaked with rain and dirt, but filled with defiance. He tried to hold on, to ask who she was, but darkness swept over him before the words could form. For a man who had built walls around everything human inside him, it was strange to be saved by a child. That thought stayed with him as he slipped into unconsciousness, the faint sound of her breathing, the last real thing in his world. Ethan woke to the sound of someone wringing out a wet cloth. The room smelled of damp air and medicine. His chest ached with every breath, but the voice humming softly beside him was steady, almost calming. He opened his eyes to see the girl from the alley, Harper, pressing a towel against the cut on his temple. Her small hands were careful, precise, as if she had done this many times before. The apartment was barely lit. Paint peeled from the walls, and the ceiling leaked near the corner where an old woman lay on a thin mattress, coughing weakly. Harper didn't look up when Ethan tried to speak. She said quietly that her grandmother was just sleeping, that the cough always sounded worse at night. Ethan tried to sit up, but the pain in his ribs pulled him back. He mumbled that he should pay her, that he had money. Harper shook her head, not even glancing at him. "If money could fix everything, I'd be rich by now." Her words landed heavier than the rain had. Ethan stared at her, unsure what to say. She wrung out the towel again, replaced it on his forehead, and kept working without a trace of hesitation. When he asked her name, she said it simply, as if it didn't matter much anymore. Harper Lee. No relation to the author. My mum just liked the sound of it before everything got bad. She sat down across from him, arms wrapped around her knees, voice quiet but unafraid. Her father had borrowed money from men who didn't forgive. When he couldn't pay, they came to their door. He tried to fight, and one night he didn't come back. Her mother worked 2 jobs until her heart gave out from exhaustion. The debts didn't die with them. They still knock sometimes, asking for what's left. Ethan listened in silence. Every word felt like a reflection of his own ruin. Only hers had no walls, no lawyers, no security guards to hide behind. She was 12, already carrying the kind of weight he had spent 40 years running from. He looked at her grandmother's frail figure, the broken furniture, the damp floor. For a man who owned penthouses across the city, the sight of a child living like this pressed something deep inside him. Harper noticed him watching and shrugged like it didn't matter. "People always say they'll help," she said softly. "But help means you owe them later. I don't want to owe anyone." Then she stood, pulled a thin blanket from a chair, and covered him with it. "You should rest. Tomorrow's going to hurt more than tonight." As she turned away, Ethan caught himself whispering thank you. She didn't respond. The only sound left was her grandmother's shallow breathing and the soft creak of the floor as Harper moved through the room. He lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling a strange warmth spreading through the cold ache in his chest. For the first time in years, someone had helped him without asking for anything. Ethan sat up slowly, the thin blanket slipping from his shoulders. Morning light crept through the cracked blinds, painting narrow lines across the floor. Harper was sitting by the window, tying her shoelaces. She glanced back when she heard him move, but said nothing. He looked at her and spoke softly, asking how long he had been out. She answered without turning. 2 nights. You were lucky. Most people who get jumped like that don't wake up the same." He nodded, rubbing the back of his neck, unsure how to thank her. His voice was rough when he finally said that luck had never really been on his side. Harper didn't respond, just kept her eyes on the street below. Something about her quietness pushed him to speak, as if silence itself was demanding an explanation. He told her it had been 2 years since he last slept without waking to a nightmare. He used to have a family, a wife named Lauren, and a son, Noah. They were everything that mattered before he ruined it. One night, after a long argument, he'd had too much to drink. He left the house angry, called her names he could never take back. She followed him, driving too fast, too desperate to make him stop. A truck ran a red light. The crash killed them both before dawn. Ethan stopped talking. His hands trembled slightly. Harper didn't ask questions. She didn't say she was sorry. She just waited, eyes steady, letting him fill the silence at his own pace. He told her how guilt became his oxygen. He threw himself into work, building his company higher and higher, until it stopped feeling like a business and more like a wall. The press called him the Iron CEO. He liked that name. It meant he didn't have to feel. Then came Robert Hale, his business partner and closest friend. Robert handled the company's charity division, the part that made Ethan believe he was still doing good in the world. But it was a lie. Millions in donations vanished into shell accounts, while Ethan was too numb to notice. When the truth reached him, he confronted Robert, thinking friendship would make it right. Instead, Robert smiled and said the company needed a strong leader, not a broken man chasing ghosts. That night, the threats began. The attack in the alley was just the final warning. When he finished, the room felt smaller, like his confession had stolen all the air. Harper sat still, eyes fixed on him. Then she said quietly, "You tried to fix the world, but forgot to fix your heart first." Ethan blinked, not sure he'd heard her right. But she didn't flinch. Her voice was soft, not accusing, only tired. "You think power makes the pain stop. It just hides it until it eats you alive." He didn't know how to answer. Her words hit with the precision of truth, sharper than any insult he'd ever endured. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just a child, but someone who had already learned what he was only starting to understand. She stood, adjusted the worn strap of her backpack, and said she had to get groceries before the stores closed. Before leaving, she paused at the door and glanced back. "You can stay until you're better," she said. "Just don't expect anyone here to need saving." Ethan sat there long after she was gone, her words echoing in the quiet room. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a CEO or a failure. He just felt human, cracked open, unsure of what to do next. And maybe that was the beginning of change. Ethan didn't leave the next morning. He told himself it was because his ribs still hurt, but deep down, he knew it was more than that. Something about that apartment, broken and leaking though it was, felt alive in a way his penthouse never had. Harper didn't ask him to stay. She just shrugged when she saw him fixing the flickering light in the kitchen and said he could if he wanted. He found tools in a box under the sink, old but usable, and spent half the day tightening bolts, patching holes, and clearing the clogged drain that had been flooding the corner. Her grandmother, Mrs. Lee, was awake by afternoon. She was frail, her voice a whisper, but her eyes carried warmth. She thanked him with a look that didn't require words. When Ethan bought her medicine from the pharmacy across the street, Harper followed him halfway there, pretending she needed to check prices. He noticed she watched his every move, as if waiting for him to change his mind, to prove he was like everyone else who promised to help and disappeared. That night, he made soup for the three of them. It wasn't perfect, but Mrs. Lee smiled and said it smelled like home. Harper ate quietly, still suspicious, still studying him. She asked where he learned to cook. He told her his wife used to love chicken noodle soup, and he had tried to keep the recipe alive. She didn't respond, but her shoulders softened slightly. It was the first time she didn't seem ready to fight. Days passed. Ethan fixed the old heater, replaced a broken window latch, and found a used chair from a nearby thrift store. He paid in cash and carried it back himself. Harper began to leave the front door unlocked when she went to school. When she came home, she always found something new repaired, a small meal waiting, or her grandmother's blanket folded neatly. She started to say thank you, but the words often caught in her throat, so she'd just nod instead. One afternoon, Mrs. Lee fell asleep on the couch while Ethan mended a cracked wall near the kitchen. Harper came home quietly, saw him working, and didn't interrupt. She stood there watching for a long time. For the first time since her parents died, the apartment didn't feel like a cage. It felt like someone had opened a window to let the air in. Later that night, when Ethan stepped out to throw away trash, she slipped a folded piece of paper onto the table beside his mug of tea. When he returned, he saw it. The handwriting was uneven, but the message was clear. "You saved my grandma. Maybe saving people is what you're meant to do again." He read it twice, then sat down and looked around the small, cluttered space. The walls were cracked, the floor uneven, yet the room felt warm. There was life here, the kind that couldn't be bought, traded, or owned. He leaned back in the chair, the note still in his hand. For years he had believed success was measured in skyscrapers and signatures. Now, sitting in a room that smelled faintly of soup and laundry, he realized how wrong he had been. "I had everything," he thought quietly, "yet I never had this." Ethan woke that morning to the sound of a news anchor saying his name. His heart froze. On the small, cracked TV in the corner of the apartment, His face filled the screen. Disgraced CEO Ethan Monroe, missing after massive embezzlement scandal. His photo flashed beside headlines that screamed betrayal and greed. He stood there in silence, raincoat half-buttoned, watching his own image loop again and again. Once, those same networks had called him the Iron CEO. Now, they spoke his name with disgust. He reached out to turn off the screen but hesitated. The laughter of a reporter in the background stung more than the accusations. For the first time, he saw himself the way the world now did, broken, guilty, untouchable, in all the wrong ways. He thought about Harper and Mrs. Lee, about the fragile trust beginning to form, and shame twisted in his chest like a knife. When he stepped outside to clear his head, the world seemed smaller, colder. Harper followed quietly, clutching the list of medicine for her grandmother. They walked side by side to the pharmacy, neither saying much. Inside, the hum of fluorescent lights drowned their thoughts. Ethan waited near the counter, keeping his head low, afraid someone might recognize him. He glanced at the TV above the register again, his own face still on the news, bold letters reading "Fugitive CEO." The customers around him whispered. His palms grew damp. The thought hit him hard. These people used to work for me, buy my products, read my quotes in magazines. Now they'd cross the street to avoid me. When he turned to look for Harper, she was gone. A shout rose from outside. Ethan rushed to the door and froze. Harper was on the sidewalk, surrounded by two police officers. One held a small paper bag, her grandmother's medicine. The other barked questions she could barely answer. A few bystanders watched with their phones raised. Ethan's chest tightened. The officer accused her of stealing. Harper's voice trembled as she explained she had paid, but no one listened. Someone in the crowd muttered about street kids and thieves. The taller officer shoved her back, and she stumbled, scraping her palms on the pavement. For a moment, Ethan stood still. Instinct told him to stay quiet, to avoid the cameras, to not make things worse. Years of corporate training screamed at him to protect his image, even now, when that image was already in ruins. Then Harper looked up at him, her eyes wide, wet, desperate, with the same eyes his son had the night before the crash. Something broke inside him. He stepped forward through the rain, his voice cutting through the noise. "You arrest her, you'll have to arrest me too." The crowd gasped, phones lifted higher. The officers turned, confused. One recognized him, Ethan Monroe, the fallen CEO, standing in the street, defending a child. Harper tried to pull at his sleeve, whispering for him to stop, but he didn't move. The officer warned him to back off. Ethan refused. His voice shook but grew stronger. "She's 12 years old. You don't get to treat her like this." The crowd erupted, some cheering, some filming, some shouting for him to be quiet. Then the handcuffs clicked. As they led him to the patrol car, the flashes blinded him. Reporters had already arrived, shouting questions he couldn't hear. He saw his reflection in a shop window, the same suit jacket from boardrooms, now soaked and dirty, wrists bound. The humiliation burned deep, but beneath it, something else stirred. For the first time, he had chosen the right kind of fight. Hours later, he sat in a detention cell, the air thick with disinfectant and silence. His wrists ached from the cuffs, and the echoes of camera shutters still haunted him. He thought about Harper's face as they pulled him away, fear mixed with disbelief, the way a child looks when the world betrays her again. When the door opened, he didn't expect to see her. She stood behind the glass, small and pale, wearing the same hoodie from that night in the alley. Her hands were pressed against the glass, her voice trembling through the intercom. "They can lock your hands, but not your truth." He lifted his head slowly. Her eyes were steady now, fierce in a way that reminded him of who he used to be before power ruined him. She said quietly, "You told me once that power means fixing what's broken. So fix this, not for you, for the people who still believe good isn't dead." He leaned back against the cold wall, her words echoing in the hollow space between them. Maybe redemption didn't start with forgiveness. Maybe it started with a child who refused to let him stay broken. Harper didn't sleep that night. The image of Ethan being dragged into the police car kept flashing in her mind. Every headline, every cruel comment online felt like a punch. Disgraced CEO uses orphan as cover-up. Fake hero exposed. The world was laughing again. She pressed her palms over her ears, but the noise wouldn't stop. When the first light of dawn crept through the blinds, she made a decision. She slipped out quietly, her backpack slung over one shoulder. Inside was the only thing she had left of her mother, a small USB drive wrapped in an old tissue. Her grandmother had pressed it into her hand before falling asleep, whispering that it might help the man who saved them. Harper didn't understand how, but she trusted it. The law firm downtown was cold and spotless, filled with people who looked too clean to believe in kids from the Bronx. When she asked to see Michael Grant, Ethan's former lawyer, the receptionist gave her a quick once-over and said appointments were full. Harper begged, saying it was about Ethan Monroe, that she had proof he wasn't guilty. The woman's smile was polite, but empty. "Sweetheart, the world doesn't work that way," she said. Harper stood there, shaking. Then she did what her mother used to do. When no one listened, she refused to move. Minutes turned into nearly an hour before a man in a grey suit appeared, irritation on his face. "Who's making this noise?" he asked. Harper looked up, eyes red, voice trembling but firm. "I have evidence. You were Ethan Monroe's lawyer. Please, just look at it." Michael Grant frowned but gestured her inside. His office smelled of coffee and paper, walls lined with awards that meant nothing to her. Harper placed the USB on his desk, explaining how her mother had once worked as an accountant for Monroe Financial, how she'd discovered something wrong and saved the data before she died. Michael hesitated, glancing at the clock. She bit her lip, whispering, "Please, sir." Everyone turned their backs on him. "Don't be one of them." That broke through. He plugged in the drive. The files opened one by one: transaction records, fake contracts, shell companies. The money trails led directly to Robert Hale's private accounts. Michael leaned back, his expression changing from doubt to awe. "Where did you get this?" he asked quietly. Harper said, "From someone who believed in doing the right thing, even when it didn't help them." By noon, the case had reopened. The same media that had destroyed Ethan now screamed breaking news. Monroe framed by business partner. Robert was arrested within hours. For the first time in years, justice didn't belong to the powerful. When Ethan was released that evening, the cameras were waiting again. But this time, he didn't hide. He didn't speak either. He just walked straight through them, face calm, eyes searching. Someone told him a little girl had brought the evidence. He knew immediately who they meant. He found her at the courthouse steps. She was pale, exhausted, her clothes soaked from the rain. She tried to smile, but before she could say anything, her knees buckled. He caught her just in time. "Harper!" he shouted, panic rising in his voice. She didn't respond. The doctors said it was exhaustion, too many nights without sleep, too little food. Ethan sat by her hospital bed, his hands trembling. Machines beeped softly around him, a cruel reminder of the night his wife and son had died. The same sterile light, the same helpless waiting. He pressed his hand to the window, whispering, "I was too late once. I won't be again." Hours passed before she stirred. When her eyes fluttered open, he was there, head bowed beside her hand. Her voice was barely a whisper. "It's over now." He looked up, eyes wet, voice cracking. "No, it's just beginning." In that quiet hospital room, surrounded by the ghosts of everything he'd lost, Ethan realized something. Redemption wasn't about erasing mistakes. It was about standing beside someone who still believed you could be better. Harper had done that for him. Now, it was his turn to do the same. When the court closed its final hearing, Ethan walked out a free man, though freedom looked nothing like he had imagined. The company he once built was gone. The glass towers that had carried his name now belonged to others. His accounts were empty, and every news story moved on as quickly as it had turned against him. But as he stepped into the open air, without security guards or cameras, he felt lighter than he had in years. For the first time, there was nothing left to lose, and somehow that felt like peace. He rented a small garage on the edge of the Bronx, a space that smelled of oil, rust, and potential. The cracked sign above the door still carried the name of the old owner, a man who had left for Florida long ago. Ethan spent his first week cleaning it out, sleeping on an old cot in the back room, and fixing broken tools that others had thrown away. When Harper showed up with a bag of paint cans, he laughed for the first time in months. She handed him a brush and told him they needed a new name for the place. Together they painted for hours under the weak afternoon sun, smearing white letters across blue metal until the words came alive. The rebuilt garage. When he asked her why that name, she just smiled, her hands covered in paint, because sometimes people need fixing more than machines. He didn't answer, just looked at her and nodded, the kind of nod that carried more gratitude than words ever could. It started small. A few kids from the neighborhood came by to watch, curious about the man who worked quietly with the girl from the apartment. Ethan taught them how to change a tire, patch a hose, and sand down rust. He didn't talk much about his past, but the children seemed to sense the story written in his silence. Harper kept a small donation jar by the door that read for second chances. Sometimes there were only a few coins inside, but they never stopped working. At night, the garage glowed with soft yellow light. Ethan would stand at the door, wiping his hands on a rag, listening to the sound of laughter echo off the walls. The place had become more than a repair shop. It was a shelter for people who had fallen too many times and needed somewhere to start again. Harper helped him set up a small kitchen in the back, where she made soup for anyone who came hungry. Mrs. Lee sat by the window most days, watching them with quiet pride. One evening, as the last of the kids left, Ethan leaned against the doorway and looked at the new sign. The paint had started to chip a little, but it looked perfect to him. Harper was locking up, her hair tied back, her cheeks streaked with grease. He told her she was the bravest person he'd ever met. She shrugged and said she'd just learned from the best. He laughed, a soft, genuine sound that felt like home. That night, he stayed late, alone in the hum of the machines. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel haunted by what he'd lost. Instead, he thought about what he was building, piece by piece, heart by heart. Sometimes redemption wasn't a clean slate. It was a workshop full of broken parts and the faith to keep repairing them anyway. It happened on a quiet afternoon when the sunlight slanted through the garage windows and painted soft stripes across the floor. Harper was dusting the shelves while Mrs. Lee sat nearby, humming an old tune. Ethan was under the hood of a car, his hands stained with oil, the radio murmuring in the background. For the first time in a long while, life felt steady, simple, almost gentle. Then Mrs. Lee spoke, her voice fragile but clear. She said she once worked in a big house near Central Park for a family with a little boy who loved to play the piano while his mother cooked dinner. The father was never home, always meetings, always calls. Her words drifted through the air like a forgotten memory. Ethan froze, his wrench slipping from his hand. He asked what the house looked like. She smiled faintly, remembering. Glass windows overlooking the park. A red door that always needed a second push to close. Ethan's chest tightened. That was his house, his family, his son. Mrs. Lee blinked, realization dawning across her face. She whispered that she used to hold that little boy when he cried for his father. She would sing him to sleep when his mother was too tired to play the piano. The room went still. Harper looked from one to the other, confused, until she saw tears forming in Ethan's eyes. He stepped back slowly, the weight of her words pressing on his chest. It was like the past had quietly circled around and found him again. Mrs. Lee reached into her worn purse, her hands trembling, and pulled out a folded photograph. She said she had kept it all these years without knowing why, maybe because something in her heart told her she wasn't finished with that part of her life. Ethan opened the picture carefully. The paper was faded, corners soft from time. His son, no older than 5, sat smiling in Mrs. Lee's lap. His messy hair, his round cheeks, his small hands gripping hers. Ethan's throat closed as his eyes blurred. He sat down heavily on a stool, clutching the photograph like it might vanish if he let go. Harper knelt beside him, silent, her eyes wide with awe. He whispered, voice breaking, that he never knew anyone had cared for his family when he wasn't there. Mrs. Lee smiled faintly. "Kindness has a way of finding its way home," she said softly, "even when people lose their way." Ethan nodded, tears sliding down his face. In that moment, he understood something deeper than grief or regret. He realized that maybe life had been trying to give him second chances all along. He just hadn't been listening. The photo trembled in his hands as emotion flooded him. The years of guilt, the sleepless nights, the feeling of unworthiness. For the first time, the weight lifted. Forgiveness didn't need words. It lived in this small, unexpected reunion, in the kindness that had quietly survived the worst parts of him. Harper reached out, her small hand covering his. She didn't say anything, and she didn't need to. The three of them sat together in silence, surrounded by the hum of the city and the faint smell of oil and sunlight. Outside, the sounds of children laughing drifted through the open door. Ethan looked at the photograph again, then at Mrs. Lee and Harper. Somehow, all the years of pain, loss, and searching had led here to this simple, sacred moment. He exhaled slowly, feeling the ache inside him turn into something gentle. For the first time since his family's death, Ethan didn't feel haunted. He felt whole. 2 years later, the world looked different for both of them. The rebuilt garage had grown into a small community center filled with laughter, tools, and second chances. Ethan's hair had turned a little grayer, and Harper had grown taller, her voice stronger, her eyes full of purpose. That spring, she received a letter that made the entire garage erupt with cheers. It was a full scholarship from the Monroe Youth Grant, the foundation Ethan had quietly built to help kids who had nowhere else to go. On the day of the ceremony, the city skyline shimmered under a soft morning Sunday. The auditorium buzzed with excitement, reporters and families filling the seats. Ethan sat in the back row, not as a CEO, but as a proud witness. He watched Harper step up to the podium, wearing a simple blue dress and the bracelet she'd made from old garage wires. The audience quieted as she took a breath. She began her speech slowly, her voice steady but full of emotion. "I used to think survival was enough. Now I know kindness is what keeps us alive." Her words hung in the air like sunlight breaking through clouds. The room erupted in applause, but Harper's eyes found only one face in the crowd. Ethan smiled, his chest tightening with pride and something deeper, something like peace. After the ceremony, she found him waiting outside under the blooming trees. She ran up and threw her arms around him, almost knocking him off balance. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she whispered, "You're not my savior, you're my family." Ethan's throat tightened as he hugged her back. He didn't need to say anything. The silence between them said more than any words could. They drove back to the Bronx that evening, the truck rattling down familiar streets. The garage looked almost the same, except for a few new paint marks on the walls and the laughter of kids inside fixing an old bicycle. Mrs. Lee's old chair still sat by the window, polished and waiting. Harper took a small sapling from the back seat, the roots wrapped in cloth. Ethan raised an eyebrow, and she smiled. She said they should plant it, right there beside the entrance. "Something new," she told him. "Something that can grow, no matter what happened before." They dug together, the soil dark and damp beneath their hands. The sun dipped lower, painting the garage in gold. Harper pressed the dirt around the roots, her hands steady. Ethan placed his palm over hers, firm and warm. When they finished, they stood back to look at the tiny tree swaying gently in the breeze. It wasn't much yet, but it was alive, and that was enough. The sound of the city faded behind them. For a long time, they just stood there, watching the sunlight fade into amber and rose. Harper leaned against him, her voice soft but sure. "It feels like she would have liked this." Ethan knew she meant her mother. He nodded, unable to speak, his eyes fixed on the fragile green leaves that caught the last light of day. The garage lights flickered on, and laughter drifted from inside. The rebuild garage was no longer just a place for broken cars. It was a place where broken people learned how to stand again. Ethan looked at Harper, her face glowing in the sunset, and thought about how far they had come. The past hadn't disappeared, but it had softened, turning into something that no longer hurt to remember. As the sky deepened into twilight, the narrator's voice seemed to echo from somewhere within the quiet. Sometimes the smallest hands pull us out of the darkest places, and when they do, we finally learn what it means to live. From a dark alley to a sunlit garage, their lives became proof that even the most broken hearts can find a way to heal. A child's courage saved a man who had lost faith, and in return, his kindness rebuilt the home she had never known. Sometimes, family isn't about blood, it's about who stands by you when the world turns away. If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments and let kindness keep spreading. Subscribe, like, and share Emotional Echoes so more souls can feel these stories. Thanks for listening.